Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are joining us from. Welcome to today's webinar, The Death of Omni, the Rise of Consumer Channel. Thank you so much for joining us today. We are very excited about today's discussion and are very pleased to have so many of you join us from around the world. Before we get started, I'd like to go over just a few items so you know how to participate in today's event. By default, you're listening in via your computer speaker system. If you would prefer to join over the phone, just select telephone in the audio panel of your webinar interface, and the dial information will be displayed. So feel free to switch to telephone mode if your audio is not coming through cleanly. That may help. Also note that you will have the opportunity to submit text questions to today's panelists by typing your questions into the questions panel. You may send in your questions at any time during the presentation. We will collect these and address as many of them as possible during the Q&A session at the end of today's presentation. Also, last note that this webinar is being recorded and each of you will receive a copy of the recording following today's presentation. And with that, I am proud to introduce George Gottl of UXUS, who is our moderator for today's session to get things started. George, take it away.
Thank you, Shane. Thank you, Sumner. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us in the first of a three-part series around the evolution of the auto industry. Today, we're excited to discuss the death of Omni and the rise of the consumer channel and what that means. It's actually huge transformations that are happening in the marketplace at the moment. As Sumner said, my name is George Gottl. I am the Chief Creative Officer and founder of UXUS. We are a multidisciplinary design agency. Today, I'm very excited to introduce to you our esteemed panelists. I will let each of them introduce themselves. Seamus, why don't you start first?
Thanks, George. Yes. Good morning, good afternoon. My name is Seamus Walsh. I am the Enterprise Sales Manager for Automotive in LG Electronics Business Solutions. I'm based in Europe.
Thank you, Seamus. Jaime?
Great. My name is Jaime Bettencourt. I'm the Senior Vice President of Global Account Management at Mood Media. So at Mood Media, we create in-store media experiences through sensory elements and for retailers and brands across the world. And I am based in Charlotte, North Carolina.
Thank you. Scott?
Hey, hello everyone, and thanks for having me. My name is Scott Lachut. I am a partner and I lead research and strategy at a small company called PSFK. You can think of us as a business intelligence platform where we're looking at the latest and greatest in terms of innovation related to brand, retail, and customer experience. And ultimately, we're producing a bunch of reports and providing a insight on a bunch of different industries, auto being one of them, and exciting to be part of the conversation today.
Thank you, Scott. And last but not least, Erich?
Hi, hello everybody. My name is Erich. I'm from the AUDI AG and I work in the fields of digital retail and also digital sales. And yeah, let's go ahead. I want to keep it short and simple.
Fantastic. Thanks, Erich. Well, let's begin a little bit by talking about the new consumer mindset and what it means for the auto industry today. I mean, there's obviously have been some massive changes in the market, often accelerated by COVID, changes that were already happening prior to the pandemic, especially with younger consumers. Who would like to address what they think is the new mindset for younger consumers or the new consumer around cars today?
Sure, I'll shoot. So big question to start with. I think when we look at the mindset around automotive, I would say that in the same way that companies have threads which run throughout their business, such as IT or data or design, people also have such threads. So that could be family, it might be friends, hobbies. And I believe that mobility is increasingly being seen as such a thread that affects and impacts all of the aspects of our lives. And so I think that's really where this fits in. And so I would say that one of the growing interests that the modern consumer has around cars is not actually in the technical capabilities of the car itself, but it's in how it is a tool or an enabler almost for them to live their lives in the way they want to. So I think this is obviously, as you said, George, some of these trends have been a trend for a while, but the acceleration has increased very rapidly in the last 2-3 years, and then especially with COVID this year. I think a lot of these trends are just really shooting off to another level now. So ultimately, it's car as an enabler, car as a tool for the rest of your life.
Yeah, I think what you're saying is very insightful about this idea of bringing benefit to the consumer. I mean, what we mean by the death of omni-channel and the rise of consumer channel is that today it's really not even about channels. Consumers are moving fluidly through URL and IRL based on their needs and benefit. Would anyone like to comment a little bit about this new mindset and maybe what it also means for the luxury sector in particular?
Yeah, I would like to add a point to Seamus' comments. So I fully agree that the younger customer, especially the younger customer, are expecting let me say, more and more intelligent car, which is fully connected to their lifestyle, to their personal ecosystem. No? But even we can see, especially around the situation of COVID, ownership is still very important for the people. The people, it's still important that they own the car because they see the car is more or less as a privacy zone. It's like a cage of security in these times, and gives the customer the most on flexibility actually as he can have. No? So that is what we can see. Nevertheless, we see the trend going more and more to car sharing or just seeing the car as a tool, as an enabler. But we have to say, or we have to focus on different customers now. So we have both of them.
Yes, I think that's a very interesting point about ownership. Certainly in the world of fashion, ownership is becoming less important. I think that brings us to the topic of status and what it means as what's aspirational for customers, especially when it comes to certain automobile brands. Would anyone like to, maybe Scott, maybe you would like to comment on what you feel is the new status when it comes to cars with this new mindset that we're talking about?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm happy to provide a little point of view. And I think this really connects with what Seamus and Erich said to start. I think for me, leading technology and connectivity are really the sort of starting place for consumers, especially younger consumers. In some ways, we can think of the automobile now as another connected device within the context of our lives. So ultimately, how all of the information that sort of we carry with us vis-a-vis the mobile device and through the sort of connected media landscape that we all sort of live in, how that information seamlessly flows into the automobile and beyond. I think that opens up the door for a next sort of generation of personalization as it sort of applies to the automobile. So much of the way that I think we tend to think about personalization is in customization of the sort of physical hardware of a product, let's say. But I think when that digital connectivity piece starts to be a sort of integral part of what the automotive experience is like, then that opens the door for so many different levels of personalization. And obviously we're seeing the sort of leading edge of that start to happen. But then I think as we begin to sort of see what the automobile can sort of do, whether that's on-the-go retail experience where the automobile is sort of this like moving sort of shopping experience that's location enabled, etc. Obviously, all of the entertainment options that exist within the automobile, and then even sort of beyond within the context of things like wellness and that sort of space as well. And then finally, the other thing I'll say is certainly while performance is perhaps less important, I think there's an interesting sort of tension between performance and sustainability that we're starting to see as well. But I'm probably not the best person to talk about that, so I'll pause for the moment and let others chime in.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think your insight about the car being another vehicle to consume. I mean, social media certainly has become a shopping mall. I mean, Instagram is just brand after brand, and trying to connect to consumers. Jaime, do you have any insights around that? How do you feel that the role for cars in the future? What role does that play for consumers?
I think we have to look at it from different perspectives when it comes to, a car is something that's so many different types of demographics and psychographics, and it affects different people and what they're looking for from a personalization perspective in different areas of the country. So a young consumer in a city is going to have a very different personalized experience or wants or needs than, say, somebody in suburban Midwest America, or somewhere that's, in more of a rural, European city. So I think we have to look at it in so many different ways, and where, I think you've got these different personas, this whole concept around the consumer channel and meeting people where they want to be and where they need to be. It's so different based on the person you're trying to connect with, even through social media channels as well. So it's become more complex at the same time that it's, you're trying to hone in on different things. It's just, there's a lot to consider.
Yeah, I mean, I think your point about that automobiles touch so many different types of demographics, obviously, especially in cities like where I'm from, Los Angeles, you're attached to an automobile the second you can walk. So it's a critical element in terms of your lifestyle. Does anyone have?
Whenever you were just talking about, the auto industry versus, say, like retail, whereas, the auto, when you're buying a car, it's more of a long-term purchase. With, fashion retail, it can be a quicker, if you don't like it, or if you don't feel connected to that brand any longer, it's much easier, moving on versus it is whenever you have this longer term connection. So you want to be right, and you do want to have that brand experience and that brand connection for a lot of different reasons.
Yeah. Well, I think, again, going back to Scott's point about hyper-personalization, it's like a car is almost an extension of your home, especially if you're living in these very automobile sort of driven cities where you need the mobility in order to get around. Seamus, maybe you have a comment about that.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of interesting things being mentioned there, and I think you touched on it, as did Scott, about the status of the car. And I think there's, we've always traditionally, I would say, thought about cars as a status symbol in terms of what it presents about us outwards. But actually, I think increasingly the consumer is thinking about what does their car indicate, hint at, say to them on a more personal level. So if you're in the process of buying a car, maybe you're thinking, no, I've never done it before, but if I got that SUV and it's got four-wheel drive, maybe I could go on this really cool adventure. Or if I get the GT car, maybe I could do that road trip down, north coast of France to the south coast of Italy, or whatever it may be. And I think it's that sense of seeing it again as a tool, as an enhancer for the things that we might otherwise do, but are going to be that much better if we get the right vehicle to do it, which I find interesting. And like Jaime said, I like how that then has to be paired off against the more practical aspect of it. So there's what do I want to do with my car, and there's what do I need to do with my car. And they don't always marry up. And then I think you see the likes of Audi and Erich, who are trying to develop vehicles that can offer things for people in both ways, and then allow you to personalize to bring in more of what you want from each side, which is pretty interesting for me.
Yeah, I think your point about want versus need is a very interesting point, especially when you look at the mindset around what is considered aspirational. You know, there's a huge shift towards experience, personal benefit versus just status and brand. And I think, you know, for the car industry, which has been so brand and status driven, especially the upper end of the market, that's a major transformation. I mean, personally, we as an agency are working with one of the leading, I mean, crazy luxury brand. You know, they start at 300,000, these cars. And they're, you know, that brand is very concerned about connecting with new consumers and bringing them this more benefit driven, experiential driven type of status versus just about driving a brand and, you know, having the want part versus the need part in the experience. So what, you know, coming to that point, what do you think are the new kind of next services around cars? What do you think brands need to offer consumers today to really be able to step out and to stand out from the sea of options that they have? Maybe Erich, you might want to talk into that a little bit.
Yeah, I would say that personality or the capability to customize the product will be more in the middle of the focus of the customer in the future. And here I do not mean we can customize the car about colors or design or horsepower or anything of that. So I'd see more here services like function on demand. So the customer want to decide when and what kind of technology, features, entertainment, or whatever we are talking about, he can use at a later stage. So this means the car has to react on the needs of the customer at a later stage. The customer doesn't want to decide at the point of buying the car what kind of technology he want to buy from the OEM. So he want to decide later, and here service or function on demand will be very, very important in the future. So
that's a really interesting point, this idea that you buy something that evolves with you versus static. That's a huge,
absolutely. Because this year we can also see a strong demand of the customer.
Yes. Yeah, again, the consumer channel driving how products and the brand evolves. Scott, maybe do you have any insights on that idea?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I want to pick up on two threads from Seamus and Erich. On Erich's point, I do absolutely see, again, that sort of the same way we think about our mobile devices, that we can constantly sort of update with new apps, new services, whatever the case is. It's obviously very personalized to us based on the things that we choose to buy. I think the sort of shift towards these over-the-air updates is extremely critical from so many different points of view relative to the automobile, because to Erich's point, you know, there's an option that when you buy the vehicle, you don't have to choose every single thing right then and there, and you have the ability to sort of upgrade, if you will, over time. And then there's even the sort of possibility that these can be done on a subscription basis, so that, you know, maybe for the trip that you're taking, you know, in the next month, you want whatever the additional sort of navigation package is or entertainment package for your children, but then you want to shut that off. So it becomes like a really interesting way for automotive companies to sort of partner and monetize within the context of that, and opens the door for, you know, sort of future forward experiences. So, you know, the buying into the sort of autonomous driving sort of piece early on, and then that continues to sort of evolve over time as the technology grows, et cetera. And then to Seamus's point, I think thinking about just, you know, beyond even automotive, but products as solutions for or enablers for sort of the things that you as a consumer want to achieve within the context of your life. I think so much can be done in the sort of post-purchase world as well, to think about how you continue to make sure that the consumer is optimizing that product over time. To sort of bring in another auto example, and apologies, Eric, but you guys are in different worlds anyway. So I thought when Ford recently re-released the sort of new Bronco, or is it the Bronco? Gosh, now I'm forgetting. But they basically were opening the door to ideally sort of a new consumer who hadn't perhaps maybe done off-roading before. And so what they did was they created these sort of immersive classes to teach that sort of, maybe new urban consumer who thought that the design and the technology was really exciting, but then saw this as a new possibility. And so they brought the consumer sort of along in this journey, to then again say, hey, here's a thing that this product enables, and let us teach you how to sort of make the most of that. So I think that's hugely critical and such a big part of that, especially, as Jaime mentioned, you have this long-term relationship that exists, but you might buy a car and then not think about the next one for another 5 or 6 years. And so how do you keep that engagement going sort of over time?
Yeah, I think I'd like to touch on that, especially, and maybe Jaime, you could respond to this question, because I think this idea of an end-to-end customer journey, right, something that starts pre, during, and post, not only the purchase but also extended through the lifetime of the car in terms of the ownership. How can we push the idea of shopping, especially with this advent of augmented reality? How do you see that fitting into, because I mean, obviously we all know gaming is such a big deal right now, right? And even brands are launching products that avatars can purchase in the virtual world, which is just like, boom, mind-blowing. How do you see augmented reality working with the shopping experience in terms of buying a car?
Yeah, well, I just want to quickly kind of add on to Scott's last point, just about, I loved the piece about that extension and that connection long term. I think brands, across all industries that are doing it well are keeping their customers engaged. They're constantly providing what's next, what's new, staying relevant, and using different forms of medium, whether that's communicating. Everyone talks about the community, right? Developing that community, that's what truly matters. So the brands and the retailers and everybody that's going to win are going to leverage that. And they're going to leverage their brand ambassadors, their employees, to create those connections. So I loved what Scott was talking about there. In terms of augmented reality, I think, fashion retail has done this pretty well. There's virtual try-ons, there's ways to kind of bring that into this space. Home design has started to use it, whether that's for measurement or what something looks like in this space. And I think there's such a great opportunity for the auto industry to do this as well, to help you feel like you're in that experience, help you feel, how your experience is going to be in connection with that automobile. And so I think there's great opportunity. We recently, went through a car buying experience, and it was interesting, especially through the pandemic. We didn't want to be, at a dealership for long periods of time. So there was a lot of video. There was a lot of kind of back and forth, trying to connect in ways that you might not have done. So I think there's just such a big opportunity here. We've got to develop the technology and the content and make that accessible to everyone. And some people might like that. The younger demographic, they'll probably love that. It'll be interesting to see if it plays and holds true with some of the older, more traditional demographic as well. But huge opportunity in this space with augmented reality.
Yeah, I agree, especially with the popularity of games and the gamification of so many purchase experiences nowadays. And I think, this idea of flexibility and being open to the different needs of different demographic groups is extremely important. Maybe Seamus, do you want to talk into that a little bit about how you see maybe the shopping for a car kind of evolve?
Yeah, I mean, I think I won't cover things that Jamie's already mentioned, but I think probably most consumers, it's fair to say, would believe when they are looking at, let's say, promotional material, marketing content put out by an automotive brand, that it's filmed or it's videoed. And actually, increasingly, that's not the case. And that's the power of, I think, the capabilities of the kind of digital technologies now to create a photorealistic digital twin that can then be put into marketing content. And the next step is to make that configurable in real time. I wouldn't say too much on the technology on that side of things, because actually Audi do that very well. So maybe Erich has more to say. But in terms of what it means to the shopping experience, you can then have an equivalent experience on mobile, on your laptop, wherever you are, to being in the dealership. And not only that, I would say it could be better than the traditional dealership experience. If you think usually you go to a dealership and the car that's there is the car that's there. That's not my car. That's not the car I'm going to buy. That just happens to be the one that's there. But once you can have a photorealistic, believable digital twin that you can configure, and as Erich said earlier, configure doesn't just mean appearance or physical things. It's the services that's built into that, the future capability of that. That's my car, and that's a much more involved personal experience of buying something, I think, that is going to change things. And from a practical point of view, it also means that you can conduct retail of these big ticket items in physically a much smaller space. If you don't need to fit in so many physical cars, if you can actually give your consumers access to far more cars and in infinite configurations, then that's going to cause a massive change. And we're already seeing it. I mean, guys have been doing it for a few years now, but the progress is phenomenal. It's really impressive to see.
Yeah, especially I think, going back to the gamification aspect, the acceleration of the quality of the visual content nowadays is amazing. Like the photorealistic, you're almost feeling like you're there in the space. And certainly, there's like Grand Theft Auto, for example, the brands that participate in that game have a huge brand halo around them. And we know for a fact, because our agency works with some of those luxury car brands, that the cars that are in the game have a really high brand value in relation to some of the other luxury brands, simply because people want to drive the Maserati that's in Grand Theft Auto in real life, and those that can afford it buy it. And so I think going back to the virtual aspect of it, how do you think, Erich, maybe that will transform the dealership and the experience around that? Do you have any ideas or comments around that?
Yeah, augmented shopping is a long and big story. No? And honestly say, I do not want to stick on augmented reality or augmented shopping, because we gained a lot of experience the last few years on immersive shopping. So we tried a lot, and so even I wanna regular 3D assets be part of the immersive shopping for this discussion, because here we experience the most benefit for the customer as well as for the dealer, because with the regular 3D assets, we were able to show the customer the product in the best quality we can give it. So if we dive into immersive technologies, then it's a different story, no? Because you have many advantages as well as disadvantages of each technology. So immersive shopping, I do not fully agree if we talking about selling a car. is, from my perspective and in my opinion, if you're talking about helping the dealer by selling parts of the car. This is really a big benefit in the automotive at the moment. So if you're talking about you want to explain something, or you want to show the customer different interiors which are not at the dealership at the moment, but the entire car, it's hard to get into an immersive technology, even if we all use iPads, smartphones, or whatever, tablets, and here, so we did many pilots, and we covered many use cases, even also with the augmented, and we still can experience some resistance by the customer to use the technology, especially if you're talking about virtual reality, which closes or isolates the customer. Within virtual reality, we are able to bring the most benefit to the customer, but we have the disadvantage of the isolation of the customer. So interaction between the salesman and the customer is very difficult. If we switch to augmented reality to explain some parts, but we experienced that the customer was not really, how to say, not really amused of it. So there was also a resistance. So from an experience point of view, emotional experience, I fully agree. This will be is a big game changer now. But I will see immersive shopping. Yes, I'm still see a big benefit in immersive shopping, but I think it will not be a quick game changer. So this will become more and more stepwise. Technology has to go forward. We have to develop again. It's always a matter of cost. Sometimes we do not know enough about the customer for the immersive shopping, because we experience that the customer misses the balance between what is really a benefit for me and what is just gamification. So, and with just gamification, you cannot sell a product. No, you can just support to sell a product.
Okay. Does you have a comment on that, Seamus, or?
Yeah, I found that really interesting listening to Erich there, and it's perhaps something I haven't given enough consideration to before. But if you look at these automotive manufacturers, the amount of iteration, design thinking, technological development over a consistent period of time to find improvements in what they manufacture is frankly incredible. It's very, very impressive. That's much harder to achieve in retail in terms of the techniques and the format of your retail estate, especially as with the majority of automotive brands, they don't own their retail estate, it's franchised. And so I think hearing Erich say that they've gone through a number of these different trials is really important, because there's so much capability out there. In terms of technology, yes, but in terms of just innovating the format and the process of retail, that what works for one brand won't always work for another necessarily. But I think Erich highlighted quite clearly, there is still significant scope for us to do more collectively as an ecosystem around this. And so just putting ideas into practice and testing them and trialing them, I think is going to be really important. And perhaps those who are able to iterate not just their product, but their way of selling it, will eventually see the most success, although it may require the most work to get there.
You know, it's kind of an interesting concept when you think about, you know, the retail space and the dealership space and what you're trying to actually do. So Erich, your point about, you know, does some of the technology get to product focused or informed focused, whereas a lot of retail space, it's supposed to be engaging and kind of that aspirational, emotional experience that I think visuals and sensory experiences can help drive to that that final sale. So are you informing, are you engaging, are you inspiring? Like, what is that content? What are we leveraging that content for that desired outcome? So there is still probably a lot of test and learn, but what ultimately are we trying to do in that retail space? You want to drive to the sale. So a lot of times I think with large purchases, it is an emotional connection. And that's traditionally what that content's been used for. So if the augmented reality, or if there's visual content or things that can drive that way, I think that's probably more of the way to go. And I agree with virtual reality, like putting somebody in that enclosed space, I think is probably going to be much harder than just that overall immersive experience.
Absolutely. So do not misunderstand me. Now, I still believe in this case. Now, I definitely see a big benefit in the future if we go ahead with immersive shopping. But we learned a lot, and for us, it's super important to know more about the customer. So actually, we use it quite a lot to support the sales process. For example, in the past, if you are interested in special rims of the product, then the salesman comes up to you with paper, and you weren't able to really imagine how does it look like at your or on your car, and now we can show you this in a very, very super cool quality, and this helps the customer a lot to be confident with the decision to buy any special parts, which is of course upselling for the automotive. So I want to hide the advantage of this technology for us as well. Here we see actually the most benefit, but so I'm a big fan of the augmented shopping, but the technology, I would say, isn't actually ready for the kind of quality we need to show the customer from our product perspective. But we were still working on that. And what we maybe underestimated in the past a little bit is that customers still emotional buying process is not only, I would say, an emotional experience, virtual experience. It's even customers want to touch. They want to experience such a product like a car in physical, in real. They want to sit in. They want to smell the car. They want to touch the car. So this has to be considered as well. But definitely, I see this as a big game changer in the future. Even we have to work on it for a longer time than expected.
Great. I mean, I think everyone's a big fan of new car smell. At least everyone wants new car smell rather than old car smell. One more question before we open it up to the audience. So what does the consumer channel mean to you? What is it, like, we're talking about the death of omni-channel, the rise of the consumer channel. Maybe Scott, you would like to start with the last question. What does the consumer channel mean to you?
Yeah, absolutely. And hopefully I'd like to chime in on a couple points too, but I think I can thread them all together. I think for me, if we think from a consumer point of view, consumers don't think in channels. They just think in the way that they want to shop at that particular moment in time. And, we're all sort of programmed to feel that we have that flexibility to do so. So if I want to be on my mobile device, if I want to be inside a dealership, whatever the case is, I do have an expectation that there is going to be some level of consistency and sort of excellence that sort of follows me through. And I think I want to just sort of get back to Seamus's point about this notion of a digital twin or a digital asset, because I think data is such a critical kind of component about all this. And if we think of an automobile in, at sort of any moment as this sort of ability to gather all of this information, and we talked about the personalization of that experience, and it knows so much about us, how we drive, the things that we like, etc. And I think there's an interesting way to sort of consider that linkage into the selling experience when you know a lot about who that customer is and can begin to sort of help them make more informed decisions based on the things that they've already done and perhaps the things that they want to do in the future. And then that also opens the door for, to your point, George, once we start to think about, we have the car that we own, and then there is a digital, an actual digital twin that perhaps exists on a mobile device. It has all this information that can help me as an owner in terms of maximizing the performance out of that, and has loyalty implications and things like that. And then, future forward, does my own automobile then become an asset that I can sort of plug into these different sort of digital channels? So there's a lot of really interesting things that I think kind of wrap around that. And for me, I think specific to automotive, there's so much anxiety that is produced with just sort of a consumer walking into a dealership and feeling that they're going to have to go through all of this sort of negotiation and et cetera. And I think one of the biggest sort of leaps that's happened over the past, 6 to 9 months is this sort of like desire on the part of dealers to allow the consumer to do a lot of that friction producing, anxiety producing sort of shopping ahead of time. And then even if they're coming into a dealership, to then have that sort of done so that you don't have to go into the room at the end and get beat up over price and financing and all these things, which I think is, really where it's such a small thing, but I think it can really make such a huge impact in terms of that kind of overall experience. And sorry for my dog. I'm gonna
want to comment on what the consumer channel means for them? We have about 15 more minutes, and I'd like to make sure we take some questions from the audience.
Sure, I'll kind of tag on to what Scott was saying. For me, it's such a big component is about consistency. It's just knowing that whatever avenue you take, you are going to be met with the same brand. So you're not having one experience that's very different than the other. And I think with brands that we love, you want to feel like they know you through your digital fingerprint. And so if you think about, they know my preferences, they know what I've already done, so they're going to serve up relevant content. They're going to know, okay, she likes these things or he likes this, and so this is going to make sense. And so it creates less of that friction because you know that it is meant for you and your buying experience. That's where we should be. Brands that are doing it right are there, and then the ones that are going to survive are the ones that are going to figure out how to make that personalized digital fingerprint work in any of the channels that you kind of go into the brand through.
Excellent point. Yes, this idea of this kind of personalized, they really know your preferences when you walk in. That enhances the overall brand experience. I think that's happening across all sectors as well.
Right. They see what you've done digitally, and then when you walk in, they know you, and they're bringing relevancy and timeliness and just a less friction experience.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
I would say, so let me go a step back, because we say here Omni is dead. And this is, I want to refer to multi or omni-channel. And this is where we are coming from. And from my personal experience, over the past or the last few years, so omni-channel and multi-channel is super present. And I think some companies has implemented it very successful, some not. But at the end, for me, it was always product centric. So how to say, the customers' needs and demands weren't playing any role in the omni or multi-channel, or maybe just a small role. And for me, customer channel means, make it simply customer-centric. Just know what the customer wanted to have, what is the customer needs and demands, and build the service and the product around the customer and bring customer service to the customer. This is my perspective of an customer channel. But at the end, I don't like the term the customer, because for me, the customer doesn't exist. Every customer is different. And maybe we have to find out the biggest basis for a percentage of customer where we can bring out customer demanding services to the customer. But at the end, I would say customer channel has to be customer centric and as flexible as possible for every customer needs. That's my opinion. But how to know more about the customer is a different story, no?
I think what you said about bringing it to the customer versus the customer trying to find it is a big change as well. That that brands now aren't speaking to consumers anymore; they're speaking through the consumer, right? So the consumer drives the tone of voice, the needs, the services, even the products.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Seamus, do you have any parting words on the last question before we answer some of the audience's questions?
Yeah, I was trying to think, how would I answer that question as concisely as possible? And now I'm not going to do it, because my answer would have been very similar to Jaime's, but just not put quite so succinctly. So thanks to her for that. But in line with what Erich was just saying there, I think, and connected conveniently to something he was also saying earlier, we need to consider who actually is the consumer here, because once your car is able to evolve over time, that car doesn't have just one owner. And so for the dealer and for the OEM, they need to have an offering which is aligned with their brand and is applicable to future owners of the cars they're selling now as well. And so your consumer may not have bought their car new, but they're buying into your brand and your club. And so what do you offer them then? When there isn't a car to sell them, what services are you going to provide? How are you going to help them use this enabler, this tool that they've bought into? How are you going to give them the best experience of your brand? And so it's not just an end-to-end consumer journey that you're providing, it's a multi-consumer end-to-end journey that actually needs to be looked at. I think we'll probably tackle some of these points in a specific way in the upcoming 2 sessions that we're having in January and February. But certainly that's something that I took out of just this discussion we've had now, which was quite thought-provoking.
Yeah, I think your point is really very powerful. You know, obviously resale, unlike the world of fashion, and even though now the world of fashion resale is becoming extremely important and in a lot of ways surpassing even wholesale, resale for automobiles is a very important factor that a brand needs to take into consideration. Because like you said, Seamus, even if they're buying the car used, they're going to want the same brand experience, especially if you're talking about, you know, BMW or an Audi or these kinds of brands that, you know, have a higher level of perception. They certainly want the same impact, if not more. And today, especially with digital, you know, the ability to personalize that experience or to offer a broader service is certainly available. We have a couple of questions. I want to open up to our group and see how you guys will respond to some of these. So one question is, how do brands ensure that the use of data and technology do not create an experience that seems synthetic or sterile? Would anyone like to answer that?
I mean, I guess my point of view is to consider how it's filtered through a human ultimately. And I think about that from the standpoint of retail is, I guess there's two sort of components of it. It's how that data is ultimately displayed to the person who is using it, so that they can then make that interpret that and sort of use that in a way that ultimately will help to sort of benefit that sales experience or that customer experience. I think is ultimately where I kind of see the big sort of shift there. And so alongside of that, in terms of, so I think it's important to consider who the end user is. And so in this case, in my scenario, it's the sales associate, and ensuring that they are being sort of brought along in that sort of development process, so that they ultimately know how this fits into their sort of sales experience or customer experience. And then ensuring that there's sort of ongoing training and things that are happening, so that this isn't just a sort of tool that's dropped in their lap and then is either not used or used incorrectly. And then obviously, anytime data is customer data is a part of the conversation, I think has to be an opt-in experience, and there has to be transparency sort of alongside that as well.
Yeah. I think again, this idea, something that Erich was talking about earlier, is like not it can't be one size fits all. And certainly the phygital and humanization aspect, moving again into the real world, not just digital, plays a very important role. Would anyone else like to comment on that question? Or
I could just extend a little bit. When you think about, people crave human connection. That's why they would want to go into a space, right? And Erich, you were even saying it's about that touch, it's about that kind of that experience. And so I agree, it's leveraging the data in the right way. It makes you more informed. It doesn't make it, an absolute with data. So you want to make sure that ongoing training is a part of that experience, that it is used in the right ways, and it's making you have a better experience, not just a data experience.
Yeah, absolutely. Any other comments on that question? Or great. All right. Well, we have another question. It says here that we have seen Tesla and other electric-focused brands such as VW with ID.3 growing exponentially over the last few months, especially post-pandemic. Do you think that their retail model has an influence on this growth? I see your head nodding, Seamus.
Yes, I mean, Tesla, you would have to say, of course, their model has, because they flipped the traditional model on its head and tried to move away from a dealership-focused sales model. And as Scott said earlier, allowed people to do a lot of the things that produce friction or tension themselves in the comfort of their own home or wherever they feel most comfortable to do so. But I think the other current or upcoming disruptor to this is that there are completely new brands who are able to enter the market if they have sufficient financial and R&D backing with electric cars, without having to go through necessarily the same history of development and iteration on the mechanical side that we see with the existing brands. And if you come to the market with a new product that you're positioning more as a service anyway, with no retail legacy, then you are free to make every point of sale or point of experience more or less a trial, and you're not tied to an existing dealership network. And so I suspect over the coming years, there are probably a handful, let's say we could count them on one hand, number of new brands who are each going to do something slightly different to each other, and it will all be something that's slightly different to anything we've seen before in automotive retail. and we'll see a lot of disruption coming from that. And it's going to necessitate that sort of thought process in the existing brands as well. Erich has spoken very eloquently about how this is already happening in Audi. We'll see that across the market.
Great, thank you. Any other comments on that question? Great. Well, we have 5 more minutes before we wrap up. I'd like to invite you all to just have a closing thought on what we just discussed, because I think, you know, this idea of the consumer driving how brands behave, the products they offer, and also the way channels, different types of ways of connecting are used, because obviously the fluidity of today's consumer is much greater than ever before. Maybe Seamus, since you spoke last, why don't you start, and then we'll go down the list of people here.
Sure. Okay. Closing thought would be that every interaction that your consumer has with your brand should be personalized, should be in the way they want it, but should be consistent with every other way that they can interact. And your consumer will evolve to be not just the person who buys the car from you, but it's going to go, as we said right at the start, throughout their life. Your product is part of a thread that runs through everything they're doing. So how can you tailor service and experience and offering around that beyond just selling the product?
Great, thank you. Scott.
Yeah, I think to sort of echo what Seamus just said, I think there's, you know, for me, it's that sort of connectivity throughout that sort of journey. And again, you know, one of the things that I talked about today is not forgetting what happened sort of after a sale has already been made. I think, you know, obviously automotive is good at doing sort of regular maintenance and, you know, sort of repair, but what else can you do that is less about solving a problem and more about sort of elevating your brand or elevating the product experience ultimately? And I think, you know, to a certain degree, we've seen some work being done around the sort of advocacy related to automotive. And automotive is this thing that engenders so much sort of excitement, and you have the aspirational fans who might not be able to afford a product yet, but ultimately would love to. And then you have your, you know, sort of existing owners who are, you know, also sort of fans and advocates for the brand, and how you find ways to activate and get both of those, you know, sort of consumers involved in the process and amplify what it is that you're doing. And I think there's a lot of interesting ways that that can sort of manifest as well.
Great, thank you, Scott. And Jaime.
So I think that with the velocity of change right now, with evolving lifestyles, evolving mobility, just the needs of what customers are looking for right now, I think it's just important for brands in general to provide, you know, products, provide services, provide that a consistent connection of community and ongoing community. So it doesn't just start with the actual, you know, sale or the experience. It starts the before, the during, and then the after, and then that life cycle of bringing them back for that ongoing connection. So for me, I think that's where the focus, you know, should be. And, you know, there's a lot of change right now. Everybody's going through it. And so it's just keeping your eye and evolving as the expectations evolve.
Certainly a lot of change. And Erich, you're the closing statement of the evening.
Oh my God. Now, for me, it's quite easy. So all what is happening in these days, so even through disruptive technologies, through the current situation of COVID, digitalization, transformation, I see this very positive for me as a customer, because it directs toward that what I am as a customer will expect in the future, end to end, regardless of the location. For I want to interact with the producer of the product in any way, and I want to, at the end, be sure that my decision, or I feel confident with my decision. Then for me and for the customer, I think we have reached a very good level.
Great. Well, thank you, everyone. Thank you to our audience, and thank you to our panelists for attending today. I hope you guys, everyone, found it stimulating and interesting. We hope that we see you in our next webinar coming out in January, so you'll receive a notice. Unfortunately, we had a lot of questions come in kind of late, and we're running out of time. So if you do have any questions or anything pressing, please reach out to Sumner. Everyone will be receiving a copy of this webinar, so you'll be able to review it at your leisure. Our next topic in January will be what it means to be a value-driven company. And our theme will be driving auto brands with purpose. Purpose-driven brands, so important for the future, and our next webinar will really get into what that means. So hope we see everyone in January. Thank you for attending, and thank you, panelists, for being part of such a great conversation today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.